Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
Please join me in welcoming our speaker, Mac.
I'm Mac, alcoholic, and it's a great privilege to be here. I love this meeting. Having had the opportunity to be of service and be the secretary here for the last year has been just such a wonderful experience, and I've always found that being of service, that when I'm of service, I get to be more a part of the group. And I'll get to this later, but I had some things happen this year in my life which were some major changes, and as a result of that, and I think just because of the foundation I had with this meeting, it really helped me get through that. And it also, what happened was a byproduct of direct result of my sobriety. And I have many friends in here. There's a number of the guys that I sponsor are here today, like Jeffrey and Dick and Greg and Hassan and some of the other people that I talk to on a regular basis, and my good friend Tim, and I'm so connected to this meeting. I have a friend in here, Brian. I was in New York a few weeks ago, and I go to the gym in the hotel, and there's Brian working out. And it's wonderful to have that connection. We're like the CIA, we're everywhere, and we're kind of like undercover. And just to get the basics out of the way.
Sorry to interrupt your viewing. Taper Dave here. Just wanted to take a second to ask you to like and subscribe to my channel. Let me know if you like what you're listening. I've got some very good talks here, and this one's a great one. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Tell me what you think.
My sobriety date is December 1st of 1988. I have a sponsor. His name is Eli. I've had him for a long period of time. I talk to him on a regular basis. I also am a grateful member of that other program, Al-Anon, and I have a sponsor in that program, and I have sponsees in that program, and I go to meetings of both Alcoholics Anonymous and Al-Anon on a regular basis. And that's been more of a challenge in this last year, as I'll get to. Alcoholism in my family is a family disease. And my father, I'm going to talk a little bit about my father. My father got sober in 1947 when AA was 12 years old. And in central Illinois, where I grew up in a farm town. I never wanted to be from that place. I wanted to get out of there as fast as possible because my whole life was about trying to change the outsides, thinking that the insides would feel differently. And so I grew up in that town. My father got sober there when, in 1947, my grandmother at the time, who lived in Ohio, now this is before Al-Anon. Al-Anon was founded in 1955 by Lois Wilson. And my grandmother was living in another state. She was getting the local newspaper from the town that I grew up in. And she knew her son, my father, had a problem with alcoholism. She saw an ad in the paper for AA. And so she contacted the people in this town, Decatur, Illinois, where I'm from, and asked them, could they go get my father and take him to a meeting? And so, that's sort of against the Al-Anon program, but like I said, it didn't exist then. And thank God, because what happened is those men went and got my father December 18th of 1947 and took him to the only meeting in town that week, which was a speaker meeting with 5 people in it. And he never had a drink after that, you know. And I didn't find a lot of this stuff out till later. You know, I didn't know about the disease of alcoholism growing up. My father left when I was 3. So he left. I didn't know him. I met him for the first time when I was 25 years old. And all I ever heard about was his alcoholism, his gambling, his womanizing, and all of those things. And I didn't know that alcoholism was a disease, in spite of the fact that, you know, he was now, you know, a long time sober. My mother was one of those alcoholics that wet the bed, left the gas on at night, and, you know, would pass out. And she later died of this disease and Alzheimer's. So I come by my alcoholism honestly, I guess. I have other members of the family who, just about everybody actually, either belongs in this program or the other program. And me and my son, who got me into Al-Anon, are the only 2 that are really in recovery. And what it's like back there, you know, first of all, in our family, we breed early and often. So at one point, we had 5 generations alive in our family, and I was raised by my grandparents. My grandfather was a physician, well-respected member of the community, and my grandmother was, you know, was an Al-Anon. And so I was talking to my niece. This actually goes back a few years now, and I asked her. I said, you know, Amanda was the problem at the moment, the most immediate problem, and she's my son's age, so she's now about 30. And so my niece said, well, Amanda's, you know, in jail right now, and what happened was she went over to her father's house, and they were both drunk. She punched him in the nose, and he went to the police station to press charges against her, and they arrested him for DUI. So that's how we roll. You know, I just saw that movie, The Fighter, and that's what my family looks like. You know, there's just a lot of that going on out there, and they just all kind of look that way. You know, and the family gatherings are similar. So it's really interesting to be in recovery when I go back there. You know, I go back there and I go to AA meetings and people are still smoking and they don't have any teeth, you know. We're very blessed here because, you know, we have so many, you know, we have so many meetings. And I was talking to Greg, whom I sponsored yesterday, on the phone, and he calls me every day, and, you know, and he was talking about how he'd heard that Southern California was such a wonderful place to get sober. And it really is, because we have so many meetings, you know, 3,000 meetings a week. And just, you know, the energy here in recovery is just so phenomenal. And so anyway, so took me a long time to get here. So I was, you know, off and running, 14 years old. You know, I have a relationship with alcohol that started when I was 14. And, you know, it started with committing a crime, so to speak, because in order to fit in, I stole some liquor from my grandparents' liquor cabinet in order to go out with these guys who said, you know, if you get some liquor, you know, we'll let you come. And I didn't know any better, so I stole this bottle of Cointreau, which they all complained about, but still drank. And, you know, it was nasty. It was just nasty. But, you know, the fact that it was taken made it even you know, it was appealed to the dark side. And so it just made it more a part of it, you know, the experience. And, you know, that was just the beginning for me. I don't think that I mean, that line that they talk about in the big book, you know, once, I just crossed that right away, because social drinking where I grew up in high school was a case of malt liquor and then a half a pint of Everclear, which is grain alcohol, 190 proof grain alcohol, in case the malt liquor doesn't work, because the objective was to get comatose by the end of the evening. And we would get in these cars and go out and drive around in the country and drink. And one time we were driving around in the car, and I had this friend who had a penchant for violence, and because his father shot out at him with a shotgun when his father was drunk, and it kind of triggered my friend, who was a great big guy. And so we're out in this, these were the guys that I hung around with, and we went over a bump, and he had this Kool-Aid with this Everclear in it, and he got some in his eye, and he couldn't see for 2 days, so some strong stuff, and but it worked. It worked. And so that's just what it was like in high school. I just, it just went on, and we would go out and we would drink, and a lot of those guys are dead now. One of them got shot in a shootout with the police over a drug deal. Another guy that I got arrested with when I was 14, I was telling this, Tim and I were talking about this last night. He took some LSD and dove off of a rock into a creek and broke his neck, but he didn't kill him, so he was paralyzed, and then he couldn't take it anymore, so he killed himself. And so a lot of those guys that I was hanging around with back in those days are gone, and I'm just one of the very fortunate ones that made it out of that, hopelessness that's created by alcoholism. And so I went off, and I went to college in a small town in Missouri, which wasn't really a very good experience for all, including myself. And I didn't last very long. I was in pre-med because of my grandfather, and so I dropped out of college. And it was in the 60s. I'm almost 62. So this was in 1967. I dropped out of college, and I was just off and running. And, drugs are part of my story, but my relationship with alcohol is really, what I work on. And the disease of alcoholism in me manifests itself by my thinking, by my thinking, and that my thinking is still just skewed. And it still is thinking that something on the outside can change things rather than working on the inside. And that included getting out of that town. So I ended up in Palm Beach, Florida in 1968 after I dropped out of college. I went down there for 2 weeks, was supposed to come back and start school again, and I ended up living in guest houses. So one night while we were all loaded, somebody said, "Hey, let's go to California." So so we decided I was hanging around with a bunch of surfers. We all ended up out here in 1968. I got off an airplane. A guy picked me up at the airport, and we went straight to the Malibu Pier. And I'd been here once when I was 14 years old. We went to the Malibu Pier. It was dark, and we all took LSD, and we were underneath the pier with this girl Madonna, and that's all I remember. I remember the waves and all that sort of thing. And so I was out here for about 3 or 4 years during that period of time. And my disease is I can never get enough. So my psychedelic experience kind of culminated in, I think it was 1969. I took 9 tabs of LSD and went to see Jimi Hendrix at the Hollywood Bowl. And my roommate's family were putting on the concert, so we were sitting right in front of the stage. And I've been a huge Jimi Hendrix fan ever since then. Still like Electric Ladyland. And so, music was just part of it. And so I was off and running. And if you said to me, I hear that the hash in Morocco is good, I was there. It was like I would do anything that it took in order to get there. And it was, at the time I was engaged to this woman, and we were living together in Laguna Beach, and we just picked up, and I met her in Spain, and I ended up in Morocco in the mountains in 1969, I guess it was. And at some point in time, I had a moment of clarity that my life wasn't really going so well, and that it was really on a downward spiral at that point, and it was because of drugs and alcohol. So I kind of had this moment of clarity, and I decided to clean up, go back to school. And so I went back to school, and in the process, I was still being entrepreneurial. So I got busted at LAX with a suitcase full of stuff that I was taking to New York, and that happened. So I got to spend part of my summer vacation in custody. And then I was able to go ahead and finish school as a result of that. And during the course of that, and I've had a number of encounters with the law, and during the course of that, I decided that it probably might be a good idea to be something other than a defendant, so I decided I would go to law school. And so I finished school, I did well, and then I ended up going back to law school. I had stopped drinking, I'd stopped doing other things, outside issues, and I ended up in Chicago in law school. And you know, it was during that time when the fear kicked up again, because that's why I drank, was because of anxiety and fear, and still not feeling like I fit in, which went way back to, you know, my childhood. I didn't feel like I fit in because I grew up in the only family in the neighborhood with you know, with no father. And so, you know, one more time, I'm in law school. I started drinking again. There was a bar across the street from the place where I was going to law school, and so basically, you know, that's when my drinking picked up again. I got out of law school, and I got my first job as a prosecutor, and in Chicago, and ultimately I did so well. I was running around with a bunch of people, and everybody drank. I would go to the courthouse, and the criminal courthouse in Chicago at 26 in California, and there was a bar across the street called Jean's, and it was owned by a guy who'd been convicted of voluntary manslaughter. So, you know, colorful place. They would close the door and lock it at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and the back door it was like a speakeasy. The only people, though, that were in there after that were judges, lawyers, you know, cops, public defenders, defense lawyers. Everybody went in there, and everybody had a tab. And, you know, things would happen there. They would, if you called, or if your wife called, and I was by then married and had a child, if your wife called, they would say you weren't, you know, oh no, I haven't seen him tonight, or he had one and left. And so, you know, one of my friends left one night and was driving home, went through the sawhorses, and his car went into a 14-foot hole, and he lived. But then another guy got drunk, and his foot, this was another prosecutor, his foot hit the accelerator, and he went into a storefront, and it killed him. And our thought was, we'll pay off his bar bill. You know, I mean, he had a $200 or $300 tab, and so we decided that was the way we should honor him, was paying off his bar tab. So, so that's just the way it was. And the funny thing was that people would try cases, and they'd win, and they'd bring the jurors in there. So, you know, we were in there drinking with the jurors after these cases would be over. The judge would be there, the public defender, or the defense lawyer would be there, the cops would be there. Sometimes the victims were there. You know, you know, it was just like, come on, let's go, and you know, the more the merrier. And you know, and it felt good, and it worked, and it was just, you know, it was a lot of fun still. And then I got promoted. I was very successful. I tried over 30 juries in a row, and without any losses, and I got promoted to be deputy chief of the narcotics unit. Now, you know, fast forward today, when I get on jury duty, it makes it a really interesting experience, because they bring the jurors into the courtroom, and the judge swears everybody in, and then he says, has anybody been in here been arrested before? Has anybody in here ever worked in law enforcement before? You know, and then, and a lot of the time the other jurors will laugh, you know, and I'll laugh too because it's funny at this point in time. You know, it's really pretty funny at this point in time. And but basically what happened was, you know, here I was deputy chief of narcotics. I was leading a double life, and it was horrible. I mean, it was really horrible. You know, I was going to work during the day and fighting crime, and it was night. I was out, you know, doing what we do. And I thought, though, that after a couple of years of that misery and the shame that was attached to that perhaps maybe the job was the problem, and that I should get another job, and if I got another job, that things would be different. Again, thinking that fixing the outsides would solve the problem, and so I got out of there, and you know, and by then my drinking was really, you know, it was getting more and more inconsistent. I was more periodic. I mean, I could clean up periodically, but it just went on like that for another few years, and ultimately, you know, I want to get to sobriety, so I'm going to wrap this part of the story up. But you know, it just didn't get any better. I was married. I had a son, and this is how my drinking and using, how they affect me. I went on a family vacation on Thanksgiving of 1988, and I went back to Palm Beach, Florida, where I'd lived many years before, and my wife's grandmother had a house down there. And so I would be down there, and we'd be at this beach club, which was across the street from Donald Trump's house. Donald Trump had bought this house from the state of Florida, which was too big for them to maintain. And it was the former estate of Margaret Meriwether Post from Post Cereals. It had a golf course on the property. It had a pavilion for square dancing. It had a dining room table that would seat over 40 people. I mean, it was huge. And it looked like Xanadu out of the Citizen Kane, you know, movie. And it was right across the street from this beach club. So I'd be there at this lovely spot during the day, and at night it was on an island, and I would drive over the bridge to this guy's house who, you know, who was a dealer. And I would go over there, and so I spent this weekend going back and forth and staying up all night. And, you know, some of you have heard this story before, so you know what the punchline is. But so what happened was, the last night I was there, I was getting ready to come back. I was now living in California. I'd gotten a new job out here, and I was coming back out here, you know, one more time. And so there were some prostitutes there. I thought that sounded like a great idea. The guy said, don't mess with the prostitutes, but that never stopped me from doing anything. So to make a long story short, what I thought was a she turned out to be a he, and that was it. That was my moment of clarity. I realized that, you know, that's how my family vacations turn out when I'm drinking and using drugs. And I got on the plane, and I came back to California, and I've been clean and sober ever since then. Now, what happened in early sobriety was that I discovered that my father had 40 years of sobriety and was living in San Diego. So I went down to visit him because I'd been coming to meetings. I'd been standing in the back. I never identified as a newcomer. So for those of you who are new, if you haven't stuck your hand up, I'm one of those people. You can stay sober a long time, but it is advisable that you get in here and become part of the group. But I was one of those people that came in here. I didn't identify as a newcomer, but I kept coming back to meetings. And so I went down to see my father because I'd been hearing about the steps and all this stuff. And I asked him what I needed to do to stay sober. And he said, you need to get a sponsor, go to meetings, and work the steps. Now, my father was 40 years sober. He was living in San Diego. He'd been out here for a long period of time. And he was still active in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. He was answering the phone at central office. He was going to meetings. He couldn't see. very well, but he had somebody who was picking him up and driving him to meetings. And so I did those things, and all of a sudden my life started to change. And with all the shame that I had attached to all of my behavior and the things that I did when I was drinking and using began to dissipate, because I started doing the things that we do around here, and I did the inventory work, and I made the amends, and I started to develop a relationship with a higher power, and my life started to get better. And so about 3 years into my sobriety, I had one of those watershed moments that we all have, hopefully, along the way here. And that was my father. He was diabetic. He was in a diabetic coma, rushed to the hospital, and I got a call from this doctor saying that your father wants to go to Las Vegas. Could you please come down and talk to him? And so I went down. My father was in the ICU. He had tubes hanging out of him, and he was talking about going to Las Vegas. And so I said to him, I said, what's this deal with Vegas? And he said, well, I have this guy that I've sponsored there, and I've been going there for 30 years. And, now my father liked to gamble too, so let's be real about it. But that's what he wanted. He wanted to get up. And I said, look, if you've got tubes hanging out of you, I said, you're not well. If you go to Las Vegas, it's going to kill you. And he said to me, he said, what difference does it make? He said, I've lived 43 years longer than I was supposed to live. And I got it. I could see that he didn't care. He was at peace. And in Al-Anon, they describe that one of the only things that you get if you work the program is the priceless gift of serenity. And I could see that. I didn't know that that's what it was called at the time, but I could see that because of my father's relationship with a higher power, the work that he'd done in his connection to Alcoholics Anonymous, that he had the only things that were really important to him, and that he was really at peace with himself and his maker, and he was ready, and he was ready, and it didn't matter. And I saw that, and I could see that, and I thought, that's what I want. And so then I realized that if I just do these things that are suggested around here, that I can have that same kind of peace, whenever that is. I mean, hopefully we develop that feeling of inner peace and spiritual connection early. We don't have to be sitting there on our deathbeds waiting for it. But he had it, and I believe that he'd had it for a long period of time. And I brought props because I wanted to be like Joe Fitzgerald today. But one of the things that I got from my father was this 24-hour day book, and I read it every day. And it still has the little bookmark in it, abandon yourself to God as you understand God. And on the back of it, it's a Hazelden publication. It's so old that it still has the original 5-digit phone number on it. And, and I knew that by reading those, books and doing those spiritual things and having the serenity prayer on the wall above his bed, that I realized that that's how he had developed that relationship with a higher power, by a daily practice. And so I was able to, and my son was there with me at the time, and the night before my father died, my son and I were talking about whether it would be a good idea to go back to the hospital or not, be with him. And my son at the time was 8 or 9, and he said, yes, we should go. So we went, and I sat next to his bed, and I held his hand, and I forgave him for everything. And he passed away that night. And so, I got that. What I got from him out of that experience was how important the spiritual connection is. And so since then, that's one of the things that I've worked so hard on. I love the chapter to the agnostic, in there basically, and throughout our literature, just even after what we, as Clancy says, what we chant with, it says, for God could and would if he were sought. It really, all it says is we have to seek him. And in the chapter to the agnostic, it says, for God does not make too hard terms with those who seek him. I think you can find it on page 46. And it says, for the realm of the spirit is all inclusive. And it basically just says that, you just have to look for it. And you don't even have to find it. You can look for it on your own terms. You can develop your own relationship. And so That's really the beauty and genius of the way that this program was designed, and it's all in the literature. And I love the literature. I read the literature every day. I have to leave this afternoon to go to New York at 3 o'clock. And one of the things I do is I take this book with me. I photocopy the pages out of the other books that I read. And I start my day with that in my morning meditation. I read those books, and I get connected, and I read the 3rd and the 7-step prayer. And I read from the big book. I just pick a passage, whether it's page 86, different pages that I love in the book, or I read A Vision for You at the last pages of I think it's on page 164. And I read something so that I get connected. And so what happened this year, I had the same job. I got it early on in sobriety. It's what got me here to Los Angeles. And I had the same job for 20 years. And so earlier last year, my client at the time, the company that I worked for, was having financial issues like many companies on Wall Street were. And so they were looking for creative ways to deal with legal fees. And what they decided, so I got a call from my boss who was in New York, and she said, I was going to Arizona, and she said, I'd like to meet you in Arizona when you're out there next week, and I'd like to come out and talk to you. And I thought, well, maybe that's not so good. But what I didn't worry about it. I just thought, what, it's not in my hands. I'm going to wait and see what happens. So I went out there. She came out, and we go to dinner, and she said, I need a drink. Don't you want a drink? And I said, no, I haven't had a drink in 21 years, but you can have a drink. So she had a drink, a big one, and then she said, don't you want to know what's going on? And I said, yes, but I'm waiting for you to tell me when you're ready. She said, you're so different from all the other people that are in your situation. She said, they've been calling me up, hounding me on the telephone, anxious, and she said, you just don't, it isn't like you don't care, it's just like you're waiting. And I said, yeah, I have a higher power in my life that takes care of me, and I'm just waiting because I know you'll tell me when it's the time for me to hear what's going to go on. And she basically, so what she said is, she said, first of all, you've been here for 20 years, and she said, you have the greatest respect from the business people. She said, and amazingly, you seem to have a calming effect on them. And she said, because of all your service, we wanted to make sure that you were really taken care of first. So what we're going to do is we're going to send the work off to this firm, but we're going to send you with it. And because we wanted to make sure that, you were taken care of. And she said, how do you feel about that? And I said, I think that's great. And she said, really? She said, you just, boom, just like that? And I said, well, look, I understand what the alternative is. I mean, aside, but what had happened during the course of that conversation as she was saying those things to me, I was reflecting on how 22 years ago, or 21 plus years ago at that time, that nobody would have said those things about me. And that all of those things that she was describing were a direct product of my sobriety and my recovery in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And, integrity, the calming effect. I mean, because I have a relationship with a higher power and I'm able to develop inner peace with myself before I go out and deal with the world and deal with my clients and try and be of service to them. And that, I can't be of service to them if I don't have those things. And so, I work on all of those things. And I realized as she was telling me this, that it was really because of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous that I had all those things. And it was because of my direct relationship with my higher power that I had those things. And that, one more time, my higher power is taking care of me. And so, so I readily embraced it. And she was, and then, so then I'm negotiating with the person that, that I'm working with now And I called him on the following Wednesday to talk to him, and I couldn't get through to him because he had Tony Blair in the office for lunch, the former Prime Minister of the UK. So I called him on Friday, and he was in the White House having dinner with Obama. And then we made a date to talk before he got into the pace car at the Indy 500 on Sunday. And so, you know, the minute I start to, you know, feel sorry or be frustrated about the, you know, 10-hour days I'm putting in or anything like that, I have to stop and reflect on the gratitude that I have for those things, you know. And again, the minute I start thinking that it's me that had anything to do with that, I'm in trouble. And so I don't go there. It isn't me, it's my direct relationship with my higher power is what gave me that. And you know, when I picked this date to speak, and I talked to Patrice about it, I thought this will be great, you know, I'll be able to talk to everybody after the meeting. Well, then I get Friday, they said you have to go to New York on Sunday and you're going to be there all week, and so I have to catch a 3 o'clock flight this afternoon and be in meetings. But, you know, somebody wants me to be there with them. So that's, you know, that's the good news. And I want to close by just saying that, you know, I'm so grateful to this meeting. It really is. I feel like there's family in this room. You know, I've been going to meetings with, you know, Wendy and I've been going to another meeting for years and years, and I've just known so many of you for basically the length of my sobriety, and I've met and become better friends with the rest of you over the last, you know, couple of years of being a part of this meeting. And the biggest challenge that I had with this new job was, like, I realized that, you know, it's in Long Beach, so I'm commuting to Long Beach every day, and, you know, I get up, I'm on a master's swim team, I swim in the morning, and I was going to 7 meetings a week up until this time, and I realized that the very thing that had got me all of the things that I had and given me the peace of mind that I had was the thing that I was going to have to make sure that I kept protected and precious. And so I had to mix up the meetings, go to different meetings, but I all of a sudden got some new people to work with, and I always have them call me every day for the beginning. And so I've got people calling me every day, and I'm connected to them. And if I have an issue, I can go to my sponsor and talk to him about it. You know, and so I have all of these things. I have this friend from Arizona who's an archivist. I get these great speaker tapes from him, and, you know, so I play them in the car, and so I'm able to stay connected. And so I'm very grateful for my sobriety, and it's been a great privilege to be of service to this meeting. It's so good to be here today. Thank you.
I think we got a great talk going on here. Thanks for watching the channel. Taper Dave here. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst, then one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, oop, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right. But I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.